Hey guys, so Pickled Dragon back, Pickled Dragon Unscripted, back with another episode. I think episode 4. Didn't get to record one over the weekend. My computer was out, and we had to get some repairs done. But we are back, brand new computer and all repaired computer. I got some things I wanted to share with you real quick before I get into a couple of the questions that we have, and that is, I was able to get my hands on my old Blackmore, Dave Arneson's Blackmore from 3rd edition. Pulled these out of storage. Blackmore is kind of like, the first RPG setting that I think he started in like 1970. Something like that, Dave Arneson did, and he ran Gary Gygax and a number of the old TSR gang through his world, and it was shortly thereafter that Greyhawk came about, the city of Greyhawk. But these 3rd edition books are reboots of Dave Arneson's original work. I've got the Player's Guide. I've got, and I think I shared an adventure that Dave Arneson didn't write it. There was an adventure called, it was something like the evil of the Redwood or something like that, corrupted druids and whatnot. But this has all of Dave Arneson's original stuff. There's the Player's Guide. This has maps in it, though I haven't gotten the maps out yet. Here's the actual campaign guide to Blackmore. And then the Wizard's Cabal as well. Got that. I haven't even really read these original ones. I've read a lot about Blackmore online, but I think it's really interesting to have as part of the very first RPG world. I think it's really cool. I'll get the maps out and share those sometime. But it's kind of like, it's got some steampunk elements in it. War machines and whatnot. So it combines fantasy with a little bit of tech, which I think is interesting that was the very first RPG world did that. But I'll be sharing these on Instagram with a little bit of detail, and maybe we can talk about more about them. But I have questions from you guys. So the first one is I actually didn't think about this before, but I didn't have to dig very far, but I did a little digging into the subject, and because I have my own opinions on it, so it's not, but sex in your D&D game, and whether a DM should put players in a situation where their characters could, to put lack of a better word, or are pressured into or have sex forced upon them. And my opinion is that, and this is how I've always operated from an early days, it's not something I would ever do. I would never put a player into a situation where they're forced into doing something that they, along a sexually explicit level that they wouldn't want to do. I think if it's going to be initiated, it should be initiated by players, and between players, or a player could conceivably trying to woo an NPC, but no DM forcing anything on players. I don't think that should ever happen. And I guess recently there's been a lot of talk about it online, some controversy, but it's not something I mean, it's like a very crude way of making a splash. I don't think DM should go there. But that's just me. Another question I had was rules written versus guidelines. Are the rules more just guidelines? The old Pirates of the Caribbean line, the Pirates Code are more just guidelines. Well, I'm a very um, rules or guidelines kind of DM. Um, and I even go so far as to um, write a lot of very specific rules into my adventures because I want there to be a very story driven game as opposed to a rules rigid game. So, for example, I'm writing an adventure right now where it's set in the Arctic, and these are extreme Arctic conditions. It's like Antarctica, extremely cold. Now, one of the abilities a ranger has is they have that sure-footed thing. Um, but I explicitly wrote into the adventure that if the rangers did not pick the Arctic subtype, they could not benefit from their sure-footedness and give that to their allies around them. And the reason for that is because it's such an extreme climate that, you know, a swamp-dwelling ranger should, has the ability to share that expertise of the swamp in the Arctic. I don't think so. So it's another way of creating a challenge for the party to overcome. So if it's icy conditions, they might be, slipping and sliding regardless of the ranger's ability, unless it's an Arctic ranger. Um, but I'm very rules or guidelines kind of thing because, you know, uh, there are, especially in fifth edition, there are some very sweeping rules that allow players to do things that I find that it's kind of a stretch. But like the ranger's ability, for example, giving the party extra movement and sure-footedness and so forth. um, so and I've seen online where I've seen people who actually are actively writing adventures, and they've angrily said the rules are the rules, and if you can't write an adventure that meets the adventure, the rules, or follows the rules, then you shouldn't be writing at all. And I think that's silly. um, I think that it takes away from the surprise. Yeah, you got that sure-footedness, but uh, welcome to an extreme Arctic condition. And I think that DMs should take liberties with the rules when they make sense. I don't think that the DM should be without cause punitive, without legitimate reasonings as to why they're doing something. They should never just arbitrarily decide something. But if you've got a very strong reason, whether it's a story reason or a logical reason as to why something shouldn't happen, or by all means, I think they should be able to make the rule. This is how I'm ruling it. But um, I definitely don't think it should be arbitrary. So that's my take on it. Um, the another I have another quick question here. Oh well, and back to the rules. Several people have asked me. I have a free download on my website. It's called The Bruised and Contused in the Realms. It's a guide to severe wounds in D&D. And what this guide does is, and it's something I've used since first edition, which is funny enough because I've just kind of adapted it to the different versions over time. But it came out of a discussion I had with a player, because the regeneration spell specifically says, oh, well, it'll regrow lost limbs and that sort of thing. But there were no rules for losing limbs. So I sat down, I thought about it, and I said, what is something that we could do to like put a player in a situation where they would need a regeneration spell? And the severe wounds chart was born. And back in first and second edition, um, excuse me, and third edition, if you ever reached -7 hit points, you had to make a roll on the severe wounds chart. So somebody attacks you and you get knocked down, you're lying on the ground there, you're at -7, you roll on the chart, and it could be like, oh my God, I just lost a left hand. Or, oh my goodness, my leg was chopped off below the knee. Or if there were different types of wounds based on the damage type. So bludgeoning weapons could smash out your front teeth, or a piercing weapon could puncture a lung. Or you could get shot in the throat and you could have to speak. Whenever your character speaks, you have to do your best to speak in a really raspy voice, So some of them were role play, so the raspy voice. Some of them were mechanical, game in the gaming sense. So if your knee got crushed and you were reduced to half movement, that's kind of a game mechanics thing. Or if you lost a limb, I don't have a left arm, so I can't wield a shield. That sort of thing. The players have to find a way of making do until they could find a cleric of high enough level to cast that regeneration spell. Now, I've seen some players react very harshly to the bruised and contused list. But I find most of my players love it. They just were begging for a player to be reduced to -7. Or if you want to have a lot of fun, because the players just love rolling in charts, you could do it for enemies too. Oh, that orc just got down. Oh man, you chopped his leg off and he's down just bleeding like crazy, or you smashed him in the face with your mace and both of the orbitals of his eyes are crushed or whatever. They just love rolling on the chart and seeing the results. But I haven't really ever had, I've had players who were upset that they had to roll on the chart for their character. But they were also the player that was just itching to see someone else have to roll on the chart. So, in the end, my players have always agreed to have the chart in play. And I guess it's something that you as a DM would have to decide whether or not you want to, whether or not you would want to have a chart like that in your game. Because if your players, all of them are just adamant against it, I wouldn't force anything like that on anyone. Again, it's something that's outside of the rules. It's a house rule kind of thing. But it's created a lot of fun over the years for us. We have my particular chart has something for bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, and then a monster chart for claws and biting. And then there are rules for adapting it to energy types, so lightning and fire and that sort of thing. But again, it's up to you guys whether you want to use it or not. The 5th edition adaptation is if you ever reach 2 death saves, 2 bad negative death saves, then you have to roll on the chart, which means that in my games, since my guys often double tap, my enemies often double tap, they immediately are putting people down to 2 death saves, which can get hairy. It means a lot of players they in my game they're very tactically minded, so they're very careful about how they work together and use teamwork, and it's mostly out of the learned lessons of my style of DMing. And again, 5th edition, I used to not do double taps in the older editions, but with Healing Word, the spell Healing Word in play, and clerics being able to heal at range, It's something that intelligent enemies would adapt to, and double tap would kind of provide a some sort of buffer against that healing word and an enemy popping up right behind them. So, Bruce Hughes, you can get that again free. You go to my website and there's a 5e products tab, and you can go and click on it, and it'll take you to a download screen. So, and it's always free. On my last question, when did I start gaming? Well, it's a bit hazy now, but it was either like 79 or 80. My brother was in a gaming group, an original gaming group, and I had been going with. Well, first he would come home and kind of regale me with tales of. I remember very specifically him telling me about defeating a genie and getting a Vorpal sword, and I was like, man, what is this all about, So he had me come with him, and eventually I made my very first character, first edition assassin. And his name was Zorod. And then I had a backup character, which back in those days, it wasn't uncommon to have a stable of characters. We're running a 4th edition adventure tonight. So you might have a different character. And my second character who was made directly after, was a fighter named Torod. So I had Zorod and Torod. So that was when I started gaming. That was, oh man, it was so long ago. That was pretty crazy. But I hope you guys are all keeping safe with the lockdown and doing your best to keep busy as best as you're able. But in the meantime, please happily game and stay heroic out there. Thank you, guys.